The air is thick. Studio lights glare down on two icons, Bill Clinton and Candace Owens, locked in a moment that feels heavier than history. Clinton doesn't raise his voice. He simply lifts a folded document. "You once demanded justice for yourself," he says, eyes fixed on hers. "Why tell others to stay silent now?" The room freezes. The truth is in his hands. The image doesn't move, but the story it tells refuses to sit still. There they were, two public figures from different worlds, different eras, and now, impossibly, sharing the same studio. The world watched through cameras, but for those in the room, it felt like watching a fault line crack. Bill Clinton hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't even leaned forward. But the simple act of reaching into his jacket and pulling out that piece of paper had shifted the entire atmosphere. Candace Owens had been mid-sentence, polished, fiery, perfectly paced, defending her worldview with that signature clarity. Then came Clinton's voice. "Before we talk about responsibility, let's remember the moment you demanded it." The document fluttered lightly in his fingers. She blinked, her rhythm broken, not lost, but interrupted. Her smile, always curated, flickered for a fraction of a second. The cameras didn't blink. Neither did the audience. And Clinton just waited. He wasn't accusing. Not exactly. He wasn't attacking. But the weight of his question, the way it cut beneath the surface of politics and into the realm of personal truth, felt heavier than anything else said that night. It was the way he asked it. Calm, measured, like a man who'd carried his own scandals, weathered firestorms, and still believed truth could be held, if not always spoken. And there she sat, Candace Owens, a rising force, unwavering in her beliefs, a figure of conviction or contradiction, depending on who you asked. She'd spent years shaping her message, success through responsibility, strength through self-reliance, dismissal of victimhood as a form of weakness. But the paper in Clinton's hand was a reminder, a record, a receipt. "You filed this in 2007, he said, as if reading an old obituary. "You said the system targeted you. You sought protection, and you got it. So why should others today pretend it's all in their head?" Silence. Not discomfort, not outrage, just silence. Even the studio crew, trained to operate under pressure, felt the shift. One camera operator swore later he could hear his own heartbeat through his headset. Candace's response came eventually. It had to. That's what the show demanded. But something in her eyes had changed. Not fear, not shame, just a recognition. She had been seen. The photo doesn't show the whole exchange. It doesn't need to. It captures the instant after Clinton spoke, the moment before Candace responded. A beat of silence stretched into eternity. The truth, not shouted, not dramatized, simply placed on the table like evidence at a trial. What made it hit so hard wasn't the accusation. It was the memory. He reminded her, and everyone watching, that strength doesn't come from pretending pain never existed. It comes from owning it. In the frozen frame, Clinton still holds the document. But outside the studio, the world is anything but still. Screens flash. Headlines twist. Hashtags erupt. And Candace, she's already rewriting the moment. "They won't remember the truth," she whispers to her team backstage. Only the noise. The photo didn't change, but the world around it exploded. Within minutes of the show's commercial break, clips hit Twitter. A shaky 12-second phone recording. A quote ripped from context. A hashtag. Hashtag folded truth. Bill Clinton sat still, unaware, or maybe uncaring, of how the internet was weaponizing the moment. The segment hadn't even aired in full, but the battle had already begun. Candace's team moved fast. She was off camera, walking backstage with practiced calm but quick steps. Her assistant hovered with a phone. "Trending across 3 platforms, he said. "Which clip?" she asked, not breaking stride. The one where he says you asked for justice, and the silence after. Cut that. Make it look like I answered instantly. She didn't flinch, didn't curse. This wasn't new. For Candace, perception had always been the battlefield, and she was a tactician. But somewhere deep in her gut, that silence, it stayed with her. Not the kind that comes from being caught, the kind that comes from being seen. Because Clinton hadn't attacked her. He'd remembered her. Back in the green room, Clinton sat quietly, a cup of tea untouched on the side table. He wasn't scrolling. He wasn't even watching the feed. He was thinking. He'd seen this before. He knew the rhythm of public reckoning. The way the truth is digested not in bites, but in frames. The way silence could speak louder than a tweet storm. He didn't need a headline. He'd lived one. The folded document in his hand had been printed from a government archive, accessible to anyone willing to look. But it wasn't a gotcha. He didn't bring it to win. He brought it to ask. What happens when your past stops fitting your present? When your old wounds don't match your new armor? The photo doesn't show Candace backstage, whispering. Cut it before he finishes that sentence. Nor does it show Clinton remembering the young intern who once told him, "Thank you for listening, even when you couldn't fix it." But somehow, the photo contains it all. Because the frame isn't about conflict. It's about contradiction. Candace was right, sort of. The system hadn't stopped her. But it hadn't been absent either. At a critical moment, it had responded, protected, paid. And now, she told others, it's not real. The echo chamber wasn't the studio. It was the audience outside, scrolling, liking, sharing half-truths they hadn't lived. But in that photo, for one unshakable instant, there was no room for spin. Just a document, a hand, a face, and a silence that said, "Don't forget what saved you, just because you no longer need saving." Same photo, same moment, but the ripples have reached the past. A high school student watching the clip posts. Candace once said the system failed her. Why does she think it changed? The comment hits a nerve. Clinton reads it and quietly books a flight to Stanford. The photo had become an icon. It was splashed across news banners and shared in classrooms. Edited, memed, debated. But it was a simple comment beneath one clip, posted by a student named Kai. That cut deepest. I go to the same school Candace did. Teachers still talk about her case. If she needed help back then, why act like we don't now? Bill Clinton read that line while sitting on a worn bench outside a Capitol Hill cafe. It was raining. He wasn't supposed to check Twitter, but he did. He read it 3 times. That night, he called an aide. "I want to go to Stanford High," he said. "You want to what?" Quietly. No press. No cameras. Just to see it again. He arrived on a Tuesday. Fog rolled through the Connecticut streets like breath on cold glass. The school hadn't changed much. Same red brick walls. Same hallway echoes. The principal greeted him with a respectful handshake and cautious eyes. "We don't get former presidents often," he said. "I'm not here as a president," Clinton replied. "I'm here for a story that started in this building and never quite got finished." They walked slowly past lockers and posters. Students peeked from classrooms. A few whispered. Some stared. In the old counselor's office, now repurposed, Clinton sat down. He looked out the window. She was 17, he murmured, and scared. The counselor back then, now retired, had written a statement. Clinton read it aloud. Candace was angry, articulate, and right. She wasn't trying to bring the system down. She was trying to make it see her. That line stayed with him. Back to the photo. The image had become bigger than either of them. In that still frame, Clinton's presence was no longer just political, it was reflective. He wasn't holding a weapon. He was holding a reminder. Of what happened. Of what she asked for. of what too many still ask for. The contradiction wasn't just Candace's. It was America's. In a way, Stanford wasn't a detour. It was the heart of the story. Clinton wasn't chasing a moment. He was honoring it. Because leadership isn't just about pointing forward. Sometimes, it's about turning around and asking, did we forget someone? And that's what the photo says now. Not, gotcha. But remember, the photo doesn't fade, it flares. Candace Owens stares directly into the lens, her smile tighter than ever. Clinton's hand still holds the document. But this time, the conversation has left the studio, and a private letter, never meant for the public, threatens to change everything. The photo, Bill Clinton holding a folded document, eyes steady on Candace Owens as she sits opposite, her practiced confidence visibly bending under the weight of something old, something personal, had been dissected, reframed, memed, and memorialized more than any single frame in recent political memory, yet its power had not diminished. If anything, with each passing day, the stillness of that moment deepened its resonance. It wasn't what was said, it was what was left unsaid. After the show, the narrative machine went into overdrive. Pundits lined up to spin, defend, attack. Candace Owens went on a press offensive, her voice sharp across networks and podcast mics, calling the moment an orchestrated ambush by a relic of a political era desperate to feel relevant again. I knew it, she said in a now viral clip, jaw tight, microphone clenched in her right hand. The second he reached into his jacket, I thought, here it is, Clinton's playing elder statesman with a pocketful of gotchas. Her base rallied. Sound bites flew. Commentators debated whether it was a fair move or a tactical low blow wrapped in genteel Southern diction. But amid the noise, Bill Clinton said nothing. No tweets. No press releases. No appearances. And the silence itself became suspicious, then provocative. What's he hiding now? One columnist wrote. Why go quiet after all that truth-telling? But those closest to him recognized the shift. He hadn't gone silent out of shame. He was letting the moment breathe, letting the country sit with its discomfort before stuffing it into the next news cycle. He spent the days after the broadcast in reflection, combing through old speeches, rereading letters from constituents written to him during his presidency, many of them from teenagers, teachers, single mothers, people who, like Candace once had, demanded that the system work for them when it mattered. It was during one of these quiet mornings, seated in a library with sunlight spilling across aging carpet, that Clinton began to write a letter. Not to the public, not to the press, but to her. Candace, it began. I watched you long before we sat in that studio. Not with suspicion, with fascination. 8 pages. Handwritten. Blue ink. His script uneven in places, elegant in others, like his thoughts were shaping the pen as much as the pen shaped them. When you filed that complaint in Stanford, you were asking for something many people never believe they're allowed to: fairness. And you got it. That doesn't make your story an exception. It makes it evidence that sometimes the system works when it's forced to. That doesn't erase injustice. It proves it exists. The letter was meant to remain private, never intended to become part of the next round of digital warfare. But 3 days later, it was found, forgotten on the table in Clinton's dressing room at the studio, under a half-finished cup of cold green tea. A production assistant, just 22 and eager to impress, snapped a photo and sent it to a friend. The friend posted it. The image went viral within hours. At first, many questioned its authenticity, but handwriting experts confirmed it. Clinton's team didn't deny it. Neither did he. And suddenly the public had something they rarely got from politicians anymore. Not strategy, not spin, but intimacy. The letter wasn't combative. It was contemplative. I didn't bring that document to silence you. One line read, I brought it to remind you, because I remember what it means to not be believed. And I know you do too. He referenced Maya Angelou, called back to a sermon he once heard in Little Rock, where a preacher said, "Sometimes, truth sounds like betrayal when we've spent years calling our silence strength." He didn't ask for reconciliation. He didn't apologize for the confrontation. He asked only one thing: let's not turn our past into a weapon against those who still live it daily. He wrote about a mother he met in Chicago whose son had been expelled for speaking out against racial bias. How that boy said, "I used to believe the system cared, but now I know it just nods and waits." Clinton underlined that line twice. "Don't be part of the nod," he wrote. "Be the interruption." The letter's publication caused a media frenzy. Shows dedicated entire segments to analyzing its tone. Language experts broke down every line. But the most important reaction came quietly. Candace didn't address it publicly. Not right away. She canceled 2 media appearances. Didn't tweet for nearly 48 hours. One of her aides, under condition of anonymity, said he found her rereading the letter late one night in her home, sitting cross-legged on the floor with the paper spread open in front of her. No phone in sight. "He's not wrong," she reportedly said, "but he's not right either." The next day, Candace posted a single sentence to her feed. "Still thinking." The comment section flooded instantly, supporters urging defiance, critics calling for accountability, but the tone had shifted. The temperature had dropped. The edges of the fight had softened, just slightly, enough for a new kind of silence to enter. Not the silence of evasion, but of reckoning. And the photo, the same image of Clinton and Owens frozen in that studio, gained new context. Now, when people shared it, they didn't caption it with mockery or triumph. They shared it with lines from the letter. "Be the interruption. Don't let winning the argument cost us the conversation." The photo hadn't changed, but it had deepened. And somewhere, in the noise-sick world outside, people stopped for just a second and listened. The photo, that singular unchanging image of Bill Clinton holding the folded document and Candace Owens staring back with equal parts challenge and restraint, had transcended its moment. It was no longer just a frozen frame from a TV studio. It had become a mirror, one the country couldn't stop looking into. People projected themselves onto it. The weary teacher who'd been told to leave race out of it. The young activist dismissed as too emotional. The veteran who once marched and now wondered if anything had really changed. That image, steady, symmetrical, stark, had done something most debates never do. It had cracked the surface. And in the days following the letter's leak, the conversation around it took a quieter, more personal turn. In barbershops in Baltimore, classrooms in Oakland, and kitchen tables in Des Moines, people weren't asking who had won. They were asking each other, "When did you stop telling your story? And why?" Clinton, for his part, didn't engage with the media storm. When asked for follow-ups, he declined. When offered primetime interviews, he passed. His only public gesture was simple and devastatingly effective: a post on his long-dormant social media account. No caption, no hashtags, just the photo of him in the studio chair, hands folded, eyes forward, with the words in bold, "Hold your truth steady." It went viral in minutes. It didn't roar, it resonated. And while others chased airtime, Clinton's stillness became his statement. Candace Owens remained silent for nearly a week. In an era where silence is often interpreted as weakness or guilt, hers felt like something else entirely: reflection. The letter had landed like a stone in the pond of her self-image, disrupting the clean lines she had drawn around her narrative, not erasing them, but forcing her to re-examine them. She resurfaced not with a fiery rebuttal, but with a subtle, powerful recalibration. In an unscheduled live stream, she spoke not from a stage or a studio, but from her living room, the camera slightly tilted, her voice softer than usual. "I've always believed in strength," she began. "I still do. But I've been thinking about what kind of strength actually helps people, and what kind just protects the image we've built. It wasn't an admission of defeat. It was a rare thing in public life, a visible shift. She didn't renounce her beliefs, but she acknowledged something had cracked open. Maybe I needed to remember how it felt to be 17, she said, to feel like the world wasn't listening, and to ask for it to change. The comments flooded in, some betrayed, some relieved, many stunned. But one reply stood out and was instantly screenshotted, shared, and stitched into videos and editorials. "We don't need you to be perfect, just present." The same could have been said of Clinton, who by then had disappeared from the public stage again, declining the morning shows and late-night circuits that begged for follow-ups. He had no interest in victory laps. For him, this wasn't a campaign. It was a continuation, a conversation too long stalled by fear, ego, and spin. The photo, meanwhile, lived on, but now it meant something different to everyone. To some, it was the moment truth interrupted performance. To others, it was a confrontation between legacy and ambition. But to many, it was simpler. It was the exact second someone remembered something they tried to forget, and someone else refused to let them. Schools used it in workshops. Churches projected it during sermons. Parents showed it to teenagers, asking not what side they were on, but what story they were telling themselves, and who had permission to rewrite it. In a time defined by reaction, that still image had forced reflection, and the last word didn't come from either of them. Not Clinton, not Owens. It came from a student at Stanford High, who printed the photo, taped it above her desk, and wrote underneath in red marker, "Truth isn't fragile. It's just waiting to be heard." That sentiment captured what no broadcast could. The story hadn't ended. It had been passed on, not as argument, but as invitation. And maybe, just maybe, that's what Clinton had meant all along when he said, "Hold your truth steady." If you like the video, don't forget to subscribe and press the like button.